welcome to the SVG-TV news for today, Monday, July 17th. I am Khalil Kato with the details. The third EU-CELAC summit opened in Brussels today, bringing together EU leaders and leaders from the community of Latin America and Caribbean states, CELAC, including St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which currently holds the pro tempore presidency of the grouping. As the summit is an opportunity to further strengthen the EU-CELAC partnership, discussing working together to achieve fair, green and digital transitions, and to demonstrate shared commitment to upholding the rules-based international order. The summit is being co-chaired by President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, in his role as CELAC pro tempore president. At today's opening ceremony, Prime Minister Gonsalves says the EU and CELAC have the potential jointly to engender an efficacious and constructive multipolarity for a better world.
We are assembled at a time of terrifying global turmoil of war and discord, a broken and unworkable financial architecture, and the awesome contemporary challenges of an existential kind, particularly those relating to climate change, pandemics, poverty, food insecurity, citizen security, inequity between and within nations, injustices galore, inclusive of those with historical legacies, lodged in native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies, and the debilitating downsides, the misuse and abuse of aspects of technological innovations. Still, we in the EU and CELAC possess possibilities and strengths amidst our limitations and weaknesses. And together, in concert with other nations, we can devise and implement solutions for a better world, for all humanity, not only for a privileged minority in a few nations. But for us to succeed, we must put an end to the wholly unacceptable notion that the strong with impunity do what they can, and the weak suffer ignominiously what they must. It is an historical fact that Europe remade Latin America and the Caribbean, and in the process remade itself. Out of this cauldron of remaking, most of Europe was, and still is, overwhelmingly the lopsided beneficiary in a relationship in which our Latin America and our Caribbean have been and are unequally yoked. This summit ought to acknowledge this unequal yoking and accordingly advance sustainable correctives on several fronts in a mutually beneficial manner, but with a special consideration for those among us who historically have been and are disadvantaged. Elemental justice and enlightened self-interest so dictate.
Prime Minister Gonsalves says he is hopeful that the summit will arrive at mutually satisfactory conclusions on a bundle of compelling issues touching and concerning, among other things, sustainable development, hunger and food security, renewable energy, ramping up ambitions and actions on climate change, mitigation and adaptation, and reparatory justice for native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies.
To be sure, these central issues and more are likely to generate differences of views and even controversies, but it is not beyond us collectively to arrive at satisfactory outcomes on most, if not all of them. It is clearly in our respective interests to do so. Our respective peoples expect us to work maturely and constructively to make a difference for the better. The shared experiences of our peoples in the European, Latin American, and Caribbean civilizations must be translated into shared expressions, inclusive of institutional expressions for ongoing dialogue and the resolution of thorny difficulties in mutual respect without any preconditions. Underpinning all of this are the necessary and desirable engagements, relationships, and interconnections between our respective peoples, private sector entities, and civil society in all spheres of activities. I am aware that member states of the European Union may have an understandable preoccupation with the situation in Ukraine. But this summit ought not to become another unhelpful battleground for discourses on this matter, which has been and continues to be addressed in other more relevant fora. Mature diplomacy is what is required between the contending parties to effect a resolution which, if not entirely satisfactory to each party, is at least a conclusion of mutually agreed dissatisfaction. The war continues to consume abundant treasure and to cause the shedding of unnecessary blood. And the global economy bleeds unnecessarily too, as the warring and fighting bring enormous additional pain and suffering to the poor in distant lands through rising prices of food, oil, and borrowings. So let there be constructive peace talks, not unproductive posturing in quest of hegemony or imperial domination.
PM Gonzalez further told the opening ceremony that the EU-CELAC summit heralds an opportunity to create enhanced possibilities for humanity.
Seize this historic opportunity beyond the immediate, necessary, and desirable outcomes of this engagement between our two geographic regions. I am satisfied that the history of the joinder between our respective civilizations have made compromises of all of us. But this does not mean that we must be compromising of the ideals we hold dear or the requisites of altering our contemporary condition for the better. Out of the compromises which our histories have made us, we must seek to make a whole daughter and a whole son in this fractured world. Of all time, only the future is ours to desecrate. The present is in many ways the past, and the past has held patriarchal mischiefs galore. In order to avoid the desecration of our future, we must change for the better, change inexorably the ways of the ancient regime of imperialism or hegemony in all their forms, economic, political, social, and cultural. This world of 8 billion people no longer sings unequivocally from the same song sheet of a presumed master elite, dressed up in national clothing of this or that geographic landscape and seascape. The 8 billion are no longer satisfied with the actions of the old ways, and the rulers of yesteryear or of today can no longer rule in the old way. The questions to be asked and answered are these: can they rule in any way other than the old way? Can they embrace meaningful change for humanity's sake? Are they ruled, prepared for a continuance or any resurgence of a rule in the old destructive ways? These haunting questions are required to be answered in progressive ways and deeds. The ancient regime of varied ideological stripes or tendencies proclaims glibly the quest for a new world order. The relevant queries for us are: what's new? Which world? And who gives the orders?
According to Prime Minister Gonzalez, the EU-CELAC summit possesses the possibilities to advance a progressive agenda for engagement between the two regions and for a resetting of the global agenda in ideas and practices to fit our troubled times of turmoil and global challenges, noting that this is a time of despair, a fight for our very lives, for decent livelihoods, and for production grounded in equity and sustainability. A number of recommendations have been made to ensure the sustainability of the National Insurance Services, the NIS, in the years to come. This is according to Minister of Finance and Economic Planning, Camilo Gonzalez, as he outlined to Parliament last Thursday the specific recommendations made as part of the 11th Actuarial Review of the NIS and an independent analysis of the actuarial review conducted by the World Bank Reserve Advisory and Management Partnership, RAMP. The Finance Minister said the specific recommendations are to ensure the NIS remains financially sound so it can continue to provide its services to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, avoiding what he termed as last-minute draconian changes or fiscally imprudent government interventions.
Among the high-priority recommendations put forth by the actuarial review are an increase in the contribution rate to at least 15% progressively over the next 10 years, making NIS registration and payment contributions mandatory for all self-employed and informal sector workers, considering a number of options to reduce long-term old age pension costs, including consideration of continuing the increase of the pensionable age until age 67 by the year 2032, reducing the maximum old age pension replacement rate from 60% to 55%, discouraging the take-up of early retirement pensions through adjusted benefit calculations, or making the pension formula more progressive, that is, instituting a slightly lower pension rate for those at higher income levels. Those are the suggestions by the actuarial review. According to the World Bank's RAMP aid memoir, and I quote the World Bank here now, NIS must address the imbalances underlined by the actuarial report. The mission team highly recommends that the NIS follow the actuary's recommendations, unquote. Importantly, the RAMP team goes on to calculate that, quote, the recommended reforms of increasing the contribution rate from 10 to 15% between 2024 and 2030, together with pension benefit reform, as detailed in the 11th actuarial report, would postpone the depletion date of the reserves by another 15 years, and that would be to 2051.
On the latest developments with the NIS, Minister Gonzalez said the NIS's finances have improved somewhat in the first quarter of 2023.
Net losses were reduced from 10.7 million to 1.07 million. The improved financial performance was attributed to an increase in contribution income, stronger investment performance, slower growth in benefits, and reduced administration costs. Contribution income for the first quarter of 2023 rose from $14.4 million to $16.1 million relative to the year-ago quarter on the back of strong private sector growth, led by increases in construction of 7%, transport and storage of 7%, accommodation of 5%, wholesale and retail of 5%, and manufacturing of 5%. Investment income rose from $600,000 to $4.5 million in that quarter, largely due to the partial recovery of the international equity sub-portfolio from negative $3.3 million to $700,000. Further, cost containment measures reduce administrative expenses at the NIS from $3.1 million to $2.7 million. Currently, the asset class diversity remains roughly the same as the first quarter of 2022 and roughly in line with the period under the actuarial review, with 28% in cash, 24% in bonds, 9% in loans, 25% in equities, and 14% in real estate. NIS exposure to the central government is only 11%, well below the prudential limit of 20%. This is also a reduction from the 13% recorded in the 11th actuarial review. This limited exposure to the central government is a stubbornly inconvenient truth for those seeking to craft a false narrative about the government raiding NIS coffers. It is simply not true.
Despite improving finances relative to the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Minister Gonzalez further told Parliament that the actuarial review is correct in its assessment that improved investment performances by itself cannot outweigh the drag caused by the changing demographics and generous designs, noting that reform is an urgent and unavoidable imperative for the NIS.
The discussion of the need for reform has remained high on the list of government priorities. In Budget 2018, the government outlined 6 specific options for NIS and pension reform and invited feedback from stakeholders. The response was tepid at best. After delays related to the COVID pandemic and the volcanic eruptions, the government and the NIS began aggressive stakeholder outreach to discuss the need for reform. To date, through meetings, seminars, radio programs, newspaper interviews, and direct consultations, the NIS has engaged with hundreds of stakeholders, if not thousands, including the government, the parliamentary opposition, the heads of labor unions and associations, members of labor groups, members of the PSU, the Police Welfare Association, the SVG Nurses Association, and the SVG Teachers Union, employer groups, including the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, media houses, employees from various organizations, including churches, agricultural workers, and schools, and also pensioners. I congratulate, Madam Speaker, I congratulate Stuart Haynes and his team for their indefatigable energy and dogged determination to take this message to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This effort will intensify in the coming months as we prepare for concrete reforms to ensure the sustainability of the NIS and our pensioners and our pension architecture.
In terms of a timeline for action, the finance minister said a gradual increase in the contribution rate from 10 to 15% over a 10-year period, 2024 to 2033, is on the table for consideration, among other things.
Change in pension formulae to reduce new average pension amounts by reducing the maximum total accrual rate from 60 to 55%, a shift from age pension, where pensions are received at a specific age, to a retirement pension, where pension are paid when you are substantially retired, and a mandatory coverage of self-employed persons would extend the date of reserve depletion from 2034 to 2051. As such, these potential reforms are explicitly on the table for discussion, debate, and decision. So too are reforms of the public pension system to enhance harmonization with the NIS arrangements, including consideration of measures to 1, introduce a mandatory contribution rate for employees, 2, aligning the retirement age of civil servants with the NIS pensionable age, and 3, limiting the maximum replacement rate from 127% of your pre-retirement salary to about 85% by considering a top-up on the NIS pensions. For instance, if the NIS pays 60%, the government would top up to 80 or 85% using the public pension system. This is in line with best practice and similar to designs existing already in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the private sector, including many banks and retail organizations. These measures would apply to new entrants into the civil service and could significantly enhance the long-term sustainability of the public pension system. Over the next 4 months, the NIS and the government will continue internal consultations and public outreach with a view to finalizing a list of concrete and impactful proposals. The intention of the government is to implement NIS and pension reform beginning in budget year 2024. That's next year.
Noting the reform of NIS and pension systems is an urgent local and regional imperative, Minister Gonzalez said St. Vincent and the Grenadines is not alone in facing the balance between changing demographics, maturing NIS systems, and generous designs, pointing out that based on an assessment in 2020, out of the 16 regional security systems, 10, including that of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, will experience fund depletion in the 2020s or 2030s without reform. A deepened cooperation between Japan and the Eastern Caribbean states was cemented at the 22nd Eastern Caribbean Ministerial Meeting on Fisheries and Sustainable Use of Living Marine Resources, held at the Beachcombers Hotel Conference Room in Villa on July 13th and 14th. Issues relating to the state of fisheries in the Caribbean community, the impact of the sargassum seaweed invasion on sustainable livelihoods in the OECS, challenges of sustainable use of marine living resources for sustainable livelihoods and food security in the region, opportunities and challenges within the blue economy for the Caribbean, the effects of climate change and other environmental issues on coastal fisheries management, development and cooperation in international arenas for the sustainable use of marine living resources were among matters on the table for discussion among the representatives. Addressing the delegates, SVG's Minister of Fisheries, Soboto Caesar, said that as small island states, there are significant opportunities and possibilities, and if there is a careful planned structure, it will conceive a framework to harness the resources of a blue economy. Minister Caesar thanked the government and people of Japan for 25 years of cooperation with member states, adding that stakeholders have benefited significantly. Minister Caesar used the opportunity to call for an exchange of ideas and human resource capacity building, noting that St. Vincent and the Grenadines continues to work with stakeholders to advance production with an emphasis on sustainability. Minister Caesar encouraged the youth to explore not only traditional career paths, but those within the blue economy, which he said provide an excellent opportunity for sustained livelihoods. St. Lucia's Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Security and Rural Development, Alfred Prosper, said Quote, the fisheries subsector provides an excellent opportunity for the region to meet food and nutrition security. Noting that St. Lucia stands to benefit from $10 million from the blue economy, of which a large portion will be allocated towards assisting fisherfolk of St. Lucia through capacity building. The St. Lucian Fisheries Minister also urged delegates to ensure that action is taken towards the plans set and thanked the government of Japan for their continued support. Meanwhile, a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, was signed between St. Vincent and the Grenadines and St. Lucia with the goal of providing a framework in which SVG will offer assistance to St. Lucia in livestock production, while SVG will receive assistance from St. Lucia in sea moss production. The signing of the MOU was done at the conclusion of the 22nd Eastern Caribbean Ministerial Meeting. Addressing the signing ceremony, Minister Caesar said the MOU is part of a bilateral cooperation which seeks to identify specific areas of partnership in an effort to have a more detailed approach going forward.
We are going to continue to work collectively. Today we are going to sign this MOU which speaks to a bilateral cooperation, and I don't want for it to be said or understood or appreciated wrongly that we are further dividing. What we are doing is that we have looked at the different circumstances in the different countries. And many of us will be going to our budget calls very soon. So what this MOU sets out to do is to, in a very detailed way, identify those specific areas for cooperation, so that when we sit with our permanent secretaries and our chiefs, we can have a more detailed assessment going forward.
Minister Caesar said SVG was also identified as an excellent producer of root crops in the Southern Caribbean and will be providing germplasm materials to the government and people of St. Lucia.
I see a very bright day coming when, again, just as it was done, the days of the indigenous people who moved from island to island consolidating food, and when investors came from afar and had consolidated platforms, and we saw what we witnessed during the period of geese, that we will have a homegrown company from within the OECS, taking into consideration the expertise that we now have, mobilizing the factors of production, land, labor, and capital, utilizing the hard work and efforts of the young people who can bring to bear current trends in technology and marketing, so that the bananas which are produced in St. Lucia can again be consolidated with bananas from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, from Dominica and from Grenada, and from other member states of the OECS.
Expressing excitement with the signing of the MOU, St. Lucia's Minister of Agriculture, Alfred Prosper, commented on St. Lucia's rapidly growing banana and sea moss sectors. Prosper said over 400 persons are currently engaged in sea moss production, with more than 65 exporters of sea moss.
So we are doing well in St. Lucia in terms of sea moss. So St. Lucia has its strength in sea moss and bananas, but St. Vincent also has its strength in cannabis. And right now we are really pushing the whole cannabis project in St. Lucia. And we are relying on St. Vincent to assist us in getting to where we are, because St. Vincent has the experience, they've been in it for a very long time. And so this is important for us as small island states. In many years ago, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, the last government gave up 1,000 acres of our fertile lands for a project which did not continue, and that really placed a dent on our livestock in St. Lucia. Now we had to relocate and we had to move into another area. But what hurts most was that the government of Taiwan donated a meat processing facility to St. Lucia in the tune of $10 million US. and it has been sitting there for many years.
Manager of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Meteorological Services, Billy Jeffers, says if the emission of greenhouse gases from larger international countries such as China, the United States, India and Russia do not lessen by half between now and 2030, global temperatures will continue to increase, resulting in more negative impacts to small island developing states, including St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Jeffers was on the panel on SVG-TV's Viewpoint program on Sunday discussing SVG's comprehensive disaster management plan and building the country's resilience. Referencing a report from the IPCC, Jeffers noted that studies have seen a 1.15 degree increase in global average temperatures. He noted that in December 2015, 196 countries of the United Nations signed an agreement to maintain global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius and limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Is an Earth where the temperatures remain constant. So there's a direct correlation between greenhouse gases, human-induced, and temperatures. So what this really means is if we keep adding greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we'll get a warm atmosphere, and that is what is ongoing. Now the IPCC reports on the current status of the global climate, as I said before. And to date, what we have noticed a 1.15 increase so far. We may recall in December of 2015 that 196 countries of the United Nations signed on to the Paris Agreement. And in this agreement, the agreement basically, the goal of the agreement is to hold the increase of global temperatures to under 2 degrees Celsius, right? The agreement further went on to state that all efforts should be made to limit it to 1.5 degrees, right? And as I mentioned before, we are at 1.18. And based on that latest report, if we continue on the current trajectory, we are likely to surpass that 1.5 by 2035. However, the latest report offers some hope. While the window of opportunity is closing for us, I want to say us, I mean the large global emitters of greenhouse gases.
Jeffers noted that if greenhouse gases continue to add to the atmosphere, there will be a warmer atmosphere, which is ongoing, and causing more drought and other hazards.
In the impacts of the 1.15 increase, we have seen more droughts, heat waves, more storms, more hurricane, and the sea level continues to rise. So that's the current state of the global climate. So far, the 1.15 that I mentioned earlier, it's what we have seen in the last 30 years. And in meteorology, 30 years constitutes a climatological period or climate norm. And we have seen some records being smashed in the last 30 years. And I'll list a few. 2020, we had the busiest season in the Atlantic. We had a total of 30 named storms, 15 hurricanes, and 7 major hurricanes. That's a record. You know, at the start of the season, right, that we have this, the list of names in alphabetical order.
Yes.
In that particular year, we had exhausted the list, and we had to go to the Greek alphabet. So we had to use alpha, beta, delta, and so on, right? So that is one notable record. Costliest storms occurred in the last 20 or so years. In 2005, there was Katrina,
Yes.
and 2017, Harvey.
And Maria.
Meanwhile, Director of the National Emergency Management Organization, Michelle Forbes, outlined the strategies they have been working on to build SVG's resilience with all hazards, but especially those caused by climate change. She noted that the development of the disaster management plan is one of the initiatives taken.
The hazards, all the threats from the hydrometeorological hazards. We're in hurricane season, yes, but it's not only about the hurricane season. It's about the other threats that can happen throughout the year. We came out of the pandemic, we see the health-related hazards, we see the man-made hazards that can impact us. And all of these hazards combined can have a devastating impact on our country and, of course, our resilience-building agenda. So we want to look at comprehensive disaster management in a context that all of the hazards that can impact us can have derail our development, if you want to put it that way. So it's all hazards, and it involves all of the society, all people, not just NEMO. Many persons think that NEMO is just Michelle Forbes and the members of staff. NEMO is all of us, and NEMO has a lot of agencies under the umbrella that has different roles and functions, especially implementing disaster risk management programs to really build our resilience. And I'll give an example: the Ministry of Transport and Roads for looking at resilient infrastructure, because that's part of building our resilience. Ministry of Agriculture looking at climate smart agriculture, and the Ministry of Sustainable Development too, going to overlook the sustainable development goals and climate change. So we have all the hazards. We have to look at all the people involved, all of society, including the private sector. We have to look at all the phases of the disaster management. I don't like to use the word cycle because I believe cycles can be broken, from mitigation, preparedness, recovery, so everything that's possible. What we are seeing now in our current environment is that despite all of the gains that we have made in reducing our risk to some extent, there's one thing that can throw us off, hit us with a curveball. It's called climate change. And climate change from the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction, some of their studies came out recently showing you that this climate change has that effect to derail our development, and we may not even be allowed, we may not even make our sustainable development goals in the next few years. Because
the NEMO director noted that the government of SVG recently made adjustments to disaster risk financing through the National and Emergency Act.
Looking at the whole disaster risk financing framework, because we have to be prepared as a country that we are going to have these shocks from time to time, whether it's a natural event, whether it's a volcano, whether it's a COVID-19. We saw our economy be reducing by about 6% because of the COVID-19. So these things are going to happen. But how do we build our resilient agenda? And resilience simply means that every time something hits us, we have to be able to bounce back quicker and quicker and better, so that a tropical storm, we're going to have them every year. It's going to be exacerbated, yes, by climate change, but the intensity increases. We're going to get drier, because climate change for a region means too that we're going to get drier and drier. And we have to look at the whole comprehensive disaster management, not just about the one particular hazard, all the hazards, not just about NEMO, but all of us. And I look forward to building our national agenda in terms of being able to resist the shocks that we're going to have over the period of time. I think each sector, everyone have to look at that whole risk assessment within your sectors, how the particular risk is going to affect you and how you're going to budget for it at the same time, because we have a small pocket of funds and all of us are competing for it. Yes, and that's why you're having the new laws, especially looking at the risk financing part of it. I know the Ministry of Finance has been developing their disaster risk financing framework, so that they can actually know how to maneuver if there's something happens. And people see, when you have an event, there's a lot of money being spent. There's a lot of money being spent on resources to really manage these emergencies. And if we continue to spend that kind of money, we have to look at more of minimizing our risk, so it reduces our expenditure.
19-year-old Veronique Thomas, representing Sandy Bay, was crowned Miss Windward 2023. Thomas emerged winner ahead of 4 other contestants from other neighboring communities in what has been described as a keenly contested pageant held on Friday night at the Chili Playing Field in Georgetown. Thomas won the Best Swimwear and Best Evening Wear categories of the competition. She also walked away with the People's Choice Award. Miss Georgetown, represented by Beyonce Kwashi, was first runner-up, prevailing in the category of Best Interview. The second runner-up position went to Miss Sanssouci Janisha Cupid, who got the judge's nod for Best Talent. The other contestants in the pageant were Miss Orange Hill Zada Barker and Miss Calder Donicia Yearwood. Here's a snippet of the Miss Windward pageant 2023.
Me, where? You see people that shop at airport without passport.
Oh my God!
Where Jim? There must be people in England, buddy.
Everybody dreams of we go England. My dreams to go back.
Miss, just give me my money and let me go. I tired talk. Me really, miss, let me take up my thing and I'll carry them back up our graves. I know. I can't handle this. Give me. Thank you. Me I know where that's why, you know. I always want treat Cartman unfair. Always I want work on man and I want pay. How you gonna do that?
The staging of the 5th Miss Windward pageant, hosted by the North Windward Carnival Development Committee, formed part of activities for the Windward Carnival activities held over the weekend.